track of the album, Initiate, is an interesting one for me because it actually doesn't feature any guitar at all, and that's kind of the main thing that I do. It's got lots of ambient piano and synth effects. It's got some nice echoey violin parts that I did. It's got some vocals, all that stuff, but no guitar. So I think it's the first track I've ever released on a solo album that doesn't feature guitar in any capacity. And I've used it a lot for live shows. It works well as an opener to put on the speakers so that it segues right into the first song seamlessly. Now, originally this wasn't instrumental for quite a while, but I added in vocals, just some really ambient vocals to set up the themes for the album. Just simple lyrics that deal with the themes of time and space and venturing into the unknown, sort of that hidden, unseen element of things. Those are all things that come back thematically in the album. The Great Divide is an instrumental track that, to me at least, tells a story. When I wrote this, I had this vision of soldiers making their way across a really intense battlefield, braving storms of bullets and explosions and risking their lives for a greater cause. And it's told from a first-person perspective, from a soldier who is killed in action partway through, and then, against all odds, his comrades pull through at the end, and as he is crossing over to the afterlife, he is able to finally find peace. I was kind of back and forth on whether this one should be an instrumental or whether it should feature vocals. I had lyrics drafted up and everything for it, but eventually I just settled on instrumental because I think sometimes instrumental music can convey themes more appropriately than words can. In this case, I think it just really brought the chaos to life. Full Swing is a pretty intense tune. For this one, I was really trying to channel my inner Eddie Van Halen or my inner Steve Vai. And this track is really a product of my philosophy when I go in to write something, that I always want to be doing at least one thing that I've never done before, whether that's a new guitar technique or a new melodic idea that I haven't used before. So in particular, there's this section in the middle of the song where I do this technique that I've always called cross-tapping. It's where my hands are going back and forth across each other. And I've done this before in other tracks, like in Blue Sunset on my first album, but never before to this extent. It's joined together by some more complex legato phrases. It's a little bit tricky to play, but I think it's really cool when it all comes together. Magnetic Fields was one of the tracks from the album that had been instrumental for years. I actually performed it live just with guitar and keyboard, so I had the arrangement worked out where I could play guitar in one hand and keyboard in the other hand and kind of trade back and forth between those two areas. But then I sat down to record the album and get the arrangements really nailed down, and I figured out that what looks cool on stage doesn't necessarily translate to a good piece of music. So I worked out some lyrics, recorded some simple vocals, and I think it really changed the sound of it. Lyrically, this song has to do with fighting against your own human nature. The vocals are just very long and drawn out, and then the drums are there to maintain a groove. And I think that turned out really cool. That definitely makes it one of my favorite tracks on the album. Chasing Two Rabbits was just a really fun, funky kind of a fusion tune to put together. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more stripped down instrumentally, so not a whole lot of, synthesizers or sound effects or anything like that. It was really simple: drums, bass, guitar. And I wrote this one at a time where I was trying to take on all these projects and really get my career going and make a name for myself. And even besides my musical career, I was just taking on all these other hobbies on the side. I was wearing myself out. So I remember hearing around that time somebody mentioned a proverb that says, "A man that chases two rabbits will catch neither one." And so that really resonated with me. I always like playing this one. I like how everything locks in tight. All of the instruments are nice and unison for a lot of those parts, and there's a great solo in there too. I really like how the solo turned out in this one. It was a lot of work putting it together, but I think it turned out great. The lyrical inspiration from this song came from a late night hangout session with a friend where we were just out underneath the stars, and what we were talking about is how strange it is that the past doesn't exist physically. Obviously the future doesn't exist either. The only thing that exists in physical space is the present, which is an infinitely small amount of time. The world keeps spinning, whether you want it to or not. During the pandemic, I would go for an extended period of time without seeing people that I was really close with. And then to see them after a year or two and see how much they've aged and how things have been happening with them, and they've just lived this whole other life that I was cut off from. It's just really jarring to reconnect after all of that. What I really meant to say is the point in the album where we get a little bit of a break. Instrumentally, it's very stripped down compared to the other songs, and rather than starting off softly and crescendoing up into a big explosion at the end, it starts off nice and gentle, And it pretty much stays at that level throughout the whole track. I think every album, in my opinion, needs one of those moments where you can just sit back and enjoy a lower dynamic level just for a little while. And it was also a good chance for me to explore some guitar tones. I use a lot of single coils in this song. I think I only used single coil guitar tones in this, actually. And it was pretty fun. I think the solo turned out really well. I used a Godin Progression Plus for the solo, and the way that it resonates and creates these harmonics that I didn't necessarily hit, but the guitar just brings them out. The way that it does that, I think, works really well. It kind of shines nicely on this song in particular. Power Trip is definitely one of the oldest tracks on the album. It was when I started doing live solo shows, and I didn't quite have enough material to fill up an hour set, so I wrote this one as just kind of a cheap last-minute song to add in, and it was really basic. Back at the very beginning, I was just like, okay, 16 bars of improvised solo in E minor. Okay, and then right after that, 16 bars of improvised solo in G major. And then after that, we're gonna do maybe a little unison thing so it sounds like I actually wrote a song. And then, okay, do the same thing again, repeat the whole thing. So it was really lazy how I wrote it, but then over the years since then, I just kept adding on to it and coming up with these actual interesting melodic ideas, and it turned out to be way more climactic and cinematic than I thought it was going to be. So then I thought, hey, well, let's put this close to the end of the album. This will be a nice climax. And yeah, it turned out great, I think. The final track to the album is Terminate. And I'd known for a long time that I wanted to bookend the album with two tracks that had similar lyrical and musical themes, and so we start the album with Initiate, and we end it with Terminate. And the big problem that I had when I was recording this song was that my vocals were just coming across too strong. I felt like I was pushing myself too hard. I was trying to make it too perfect. I overthink it, and it doesn't sound as meaningful. So what I ended up doing, after doing tons and tons of takes, so I ended up packing up all my recording stuff, bringing my laptop with me, and going through the Tim Hortons drive-thru. And I ended up recording the final tracks that you hear on the album in the Tim Hortons drive-thru. So it sounds awkward, it sounds imperfect. And yeah, I think it fixed my issues. I think it turned out exactly as I wanted it to.
Every night the dreams return. I see you looking back at me.